Hey, folks, welcome to the Camp Constitution Report as well as Camp Constitution Radio. The Camp Constitution Report, of course, is heard on, or I should say, originates on catchingfire.news. And we really strongly encourage you, all of you, to, if you haven't already, sign up for catchingfire.news and share not just my show, but all of the other shows that you find of interest, and let people know. Don't make this a secret. I tell people over the years, people ask me if they can have borrow a book, or can they quote me, or is it okay to forward your email? And I said, yeah, we don't ration bullets in wartime, and these are educational bullets, of course, that need to get out. And well, I have a don't have a guest today, but I have sort of a potpourri of topics to discuss. I'm going to talk a little bit about Black History Month. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Article 5 convention and why it needs to be stopped. But one of the things I do, if you visit me on Facebook, I sell a lot of folks donate books to Camp Constitution. And over the years, we've been blessed with some great libraries. People either pass away, move away, or downsize. And I had a few friends that just gave, it's just in the last few months, a friend of mine in Massachusetts who I know a lot of the books that he ended up donating to Camp Constitution, I sold to him over the years. But he would buy a hardback, a copy of almost every book, and then a paperback version. And he had them in nice, had the hardback in nice plastic wrap, so it looked really good. And some of these books will be in our library. Camp Constitution has a library here where I am, and also in our place in Lexington. But we do sell some, a lot of them, and some of them I sell on Amazon. I'd rather not give Amazon the little make a cut. I also put some of the books on. Of course, we have a online bookstore where we sell items, campconstitution.net, and then you can see the online shop. But we also sell books on Facebook, and my habit is just to take pictures of the books and then upload them on my personal Facebook page, Hal Shirtliff, and just ask, make an offer. Sometimes I'll talk a little bit about the book, make an offer, and this helps keep it. It helps fund our efforts, but it also introduces, I think, some timeless classics to a lot of people who are not familiar. A lot of new patriots, or people who have been patriots over the last 10 years or so. But a lot of these books they're just not familiar with. They're most you get a lot of these what I call neocon books, and other books that might be you'll some. It seems like every neocon on television has a book every 6 months, and they're like $35, $40 a piece. And you can get more information in my magazine article than in some of these books. Not to say some of them don't have merit, but one of the books I just came across and put up on our Facebook page is a book called Little Pink House. Now it's not part of not a song by John Mellencamp or Coog or whatever his name is, Little Pink Houses. It's a story of Suzette Kilo, who lived in New London, Connecticut. I actually got a chance to meet Suzette. I went to that Little Pink House, or Pink House, during the debacle. It took place in the early 2000s. So she was a nurse. I think at the time she was in her early 40s. Very, very nice lady. I just knocked on the door and she treated me like we were old friends. I went in there and, she had my sympathy and my support. But New London is a city right on the we don't say Thames, we say Thames River, which goes into Long Island Sound. And there's a beautiful fort, I think it's called Fort Trumbull, named after the governor. And she she bought this house right near the fort, right on the not right on the river, but close to the river. And Pfizer Drug Company had a presence in New London, and they decided to expand. And they wanted this particular neighborhood, and they offered above market price, which is generally what they do when the companies do when they want to buy. And she didn't want to sell. I think there was somebody else that didn't want to sell, but she didn't want to sell. And this was a property rights issue. We use the word property rights, but we should point out that property itself doesn't have a right. It's the folks who own the property that have the right. So this is really a constitutional issue. Now, the federal governments can take property through eminent domain, and it's usually historically been used to build roads or bridges or some type of infrastructure improvement. It could be say you wanted to build a fort there, a military post. And there'd be a lot of hearings and debates and so forth. And then sometimes the projects go through, sometimes they don't. But this was unique. This was a drug company. Of course, they're making billions of dollars poisoning people with their vaccine, but that's another topic for another time. But the argument was that, and the city was more than happy to buy into it, is that if they expand, there's going to be more taxes for the city, higher tax base. There's going to be more employment for people, all kinds of great things, the consequences of them come expanding. Well, she actually lost her case in the U.S. Supreme Court. I think it was a 6-3 or 5-4 decision. And Clarence Thomas even voted against her, which is surprising. Uh, so she didn't actually lose the physical house. It was moved to another part of town, not where she had it. And I think she has since moved out of that. I don't think she actually lives there anymore. I was in New London following up a few years ago. Although I did a little video, and I think it's on Camp Constitution's YouTube channel, or I have one called Swamp Yankee, and I'm unable to get into it so I somehow lost the password. So I'm actually, if it's not on our Camp Constitution, I'm going to see if I can download it. But I visited this area when the area that Pfizer, this neighborhood that Pfizer basically destroyed and never built. It's just what they call a gray field. It's just where you looked at, say, oh yeah, there must be houses here, and there's some weeds growing, and I thought the only thing that was living there were some wild feral cats, house cats that live in the outside. And it's really a tragedy that all the money they spent, all the lives they disrupted, maybe even destroyed, and they ended up not building after all. And the Supreme Court had this terrible decision. Supreme Court gets it right on occasions, but on many occasions they do not. So the book is called Pink House. You could go to my Facebook page and bid on it, or you can probably find it on other venues. And they also made a movie about it, which I haven't seen, and I might just watch it tonight. It's 6 degrees below zero right now in my beautiful area of New Hampshire, right nearby Lake Winnipesaukee, which should be freezing up pretty soon. And I want to get into this too about climate change. Now, we've had a relatively mild winter in New England so far. Usually by this time, the Lake Winnipesaukee is pretty well frozen, and you see a lot of people ice fishing. And you'll actually, where we are in Alton, New Hampshire, Alton Bay is the only place in the lower 48 states where they can actually land planes on the ice. They're not landing them now because, again, we had a mild winter and it is starting to freeze. But and I did see a couple of ice fishermen, but I haven't seen any the ice shacks. And for those of you who live in Florida or live in areas where you don't get the freeze, ice fishing isn't as sporty as the regular fishing or the fly fishing. What you usually do is what a good ice fisherman would do is he or she or they would have an ice shack, which you actually drive right onto the ice. You can actually slide it on, back up your pickup truck. The ice gets so thick that you can not only drive cars but trucks. And although I remember going to Minnesota and seeing trailer trucks, 18 wheelers on the ice, so it gets pretty thick. So they would back up these nice little shacks, and they go inside the shacks. They drill their holes, and even have some sonar and all that. But they're heated, and you can have yourself a nice party, and that's what a lot of people do. They stay nice and warm on their little ice shacks as I do ice fishing. And it's quite a tourist attraction too here. You see all these ice shacks and seeing the planes land. Which brings me to the fact that the left, the people who are claiming that the world's going to come to an end, catastrophic climate change. See, every time there's a blizzard somewhere, or a rainfall, or a hurricane, or an earthquake, or some type of extreme weather, they must blame it on climate change, even though hurricanes got nothing to do with climate change, earthquakes got nothing to do with it, but they'll just lie and try to convince people otherwise. That's what they call the power of suggestion. When they say it enough, and most people buy into it without even examining it. So when you have a mild winter, usually it's a good thing because you save money on oil, which is an evil thing because it burns up and it's a killer and destroys everything. By the way, that's my little dog here. She's trying to get my attention by rubbing her nose on the computer. So hopefully she'll behave herself. And I don't know why we have so many dogs in this house. But anyway, so there was an article in the Boston Globe recently, and it said something like the Boston Globe is a very left wing publication. And it said something like, a favorite pastime of many New Englanders is ice skating on ponds, and that can't be done anymore. Well, in that same newspaper, just a few columns down, it warned of catastrophic this Arctic blast that's coming through, uh, sub-zero temperatures, et cetera, et cetera. So wait a minute, now you're telling us two different stories. So so that's what you have to wear. You can't have a mild day in February without the left, telling you this is the end of the world. Uh, and there are two times when they do tell you it's the end of the world. When you do have extreme weather, then they'll be saying, "Oh, this is just the weather. This isn't climate." But if it's a couple of hot days in July, maybe going into the 100, 101, they'll say, "Oh, this is evidence of climate. It's going to be worse, and we need to have big government. We need to ban everything that you like in order to fight this horrible climate change." And they've been saying this stuff for years. You can talk about Chicken Littles, but to them, it's a cult. They actually believe that the world's coming to an end. Now, we have to get people out of this cult. You have to deprogram them. And let me recommend a book, which I discovered, probably about 10 or 12 years ago. I was visiting Noah Webster's homestead in East Hartford. East Hartford, or I think it was, no, I'm sorry, West Hartford. Yes, there's an East Hartford, and West Hartford, Connecticut. And this is a place where he grew up. He also has a home where he, as an adult, and I think Henry Ford bought it and brought it over to his museum in Dearborn. But this is where he grew up as a young man. And Noah Webster was quite a fascinating person. He was not really considered a founding father, but he should have been. He was not at the Constitutional Convention of 1787, but he was sort of across the street, and he gave advice to a lot of people. And he wrote this great dictionary, the 1828 Webster Dictionary. Actually, really made a big impact on the American language. But in 1810, he published, it was an essay or a series of essays. It mentioned that the supposed change of temperature in winter. Now, this is 1810, and he was debating on this topic. And there were some people that were saying that the winters were getting milder, and they based that on certain species of animals that had been coming further north and doing quite well and thriving. Even Thomas Jefferson. Now, in those days, they weren't worried about the end of the world. They thought it was a good thing that the temperature is getting mild. It's pretty tough when you're living in, especially then, just surviving a winter, having enough firewood to survive was quite a thing. And so they thought it was a good thing. But Noah Webster didn't believe that. What he did was he looked at the Bible. He looked at weather patterns in the Old Testament. It was quite fascinating. He also looked at, among all things, the diaries of farmers. And he noticed that there'd be, and also historical events and how weather made the difference. And for example, when the British, the Battle of Lexington and Concord, it was a very warm day. And those poor redcoats, they had to march 20 miles in their wool uniforms. I think it was in the low 70s that day. Now, I get out to the reenactment almost every year for the last 20 years or so. And there are times when it is in the low 20s as we're waiting at 4:30 in the morning, waiting for the reenactors to show up. And there are times when it's in the 50s. I've never really experienced a seriously warm April 19th, or I should say Patriots Day. It's always done usually the week where the 19th falls, April 19th. Surely that the same day that they run the Boston Marathon is when they do this reenactment. So, 200 plus years later, the weather really hasn't changed that much. So there have been some days where the weather is really cold and some ways it's really warm. It's interesting. You'll hear the forecast. I'll say it's 10 degrees above normal for this time of year. Then 3 or 4 days later, it's 10 degrees below normal. So then you average it out, and that's how you average all the average temperature. If it's 30 degrees, 20 degrees one day, 40 degrees the next, the average is 30. That's how it works. So not like it's 30 degrees every day. It doesn't generally work that way. So we should welcome some mild winters, mild days. And I do remember some mild winters in the mid 1990s. And then I remember the winter of 2015, living in Boston. We had three blizzards right in a row, three serious snowstorms at 3 weekends in a row, and we recorded the most snow in I think, in our city's history. But the left doesn't tell you about that. Oh, that's just anecdotal. That's just weather. That's not climate. So I kind of kid people and say, look, I'm going to invest in some palm trees and some orange trees and see if I can plant them around my property and see what goes. Well, I'll tell you what, they wouldn't last 5 minutes once it gets into November or December. They will die because this is the northern temperate zone where you have hot, muggy summers and very cold and snowy winters. And that's not going to change anytime soon. Definitely not going to change in my lifetime. In fact, um, since I can remember as a junior high student, my eighth grade teacher talking about global cooling, and for the same reason, for the CO2s in the air, and we're all going to, we're going to have climate. Everything's going to die, and we're going to starve to death because it's going to be too cold. You can't grow any food. The lakes and ponds will all freeze up. All the vegetation will die, et cetera, et cetera. And that hadn't happened. In fact, it's interesting. You can actually go on to Google or any other search images and find all these dire warnings. Then you can go back in the 1930s. I interviewed a man named Tony Heller, Heller, and he's a sort of a weather historian, among all things. I think he's an engineer by trade, and he looks at newspaper articles from for the last 100+ years and all of these alarmists. And but he mentioned this terrible. We had several years of extremely hot winters. I'm sorry, hot summers, where it got into the triple digits in the Northeast, and people died. There was hundreds of deaths because of heat exhaustion. That was before most people had air conditioning. I think air conditioning was a relatively new thing. And he said, imagine if that happened. If we and we almost never get into in the Northeast the three digits. I don't remember the last time it was over 100 degrees. I remember in the 70s and even early 80s, 100 degrees, 101 for a few days. But we've had some 90-degree weather, 95 or so, but we haven't had any. The other thing, too, is when they talk about weather temperature setting records. Well, if a record was made, let's say in 1930, and say here in Alton, just use that as an example. Well, conditions have changed a little bit. There's more people that live here. There's more homes. So a lot of the temperature readings are based on the environment. And I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a field that a farmer had his little, forget what they call them, the little device that used to record the temperature. And they had to do it so many times. So I'd say it's in a field of hay. And then, 100 years later, that's no longer a field. That's now a store. And there's some hot top there, some asphalt. And so that same reading is going to be a little different. It has nothing to do with CO2s in the air. It has a lot to do with the land use. Land is different. So even a lot of those recordings. In fact, there was a man by the name of here's another Tony Anthony. Last name will come to me. He was a weatherman from Chicago, and he went around. Anthony Watts. That's it. I think his website is Watts Up, WATTS, Watts Up, with that, or Watts Up. And he and a crew. He had more than one crew. They would visit weather stations where they did readings, official readings, and he mentioned something like 95% of them were not were compromised. There's another term. They didn't use the word compromise. There's another term that the meteorologists use. But for example, one weather station was on a rooftop in downtown Baltimore, a rooftop. There was another one that was in the back of a building, and there were air conditioned units. So that as they were blowing hot air out. So it compromised the temperature. You never got a good accurate reading. And also, when the Soviet Union had its implosion back in the 90s, many of the weather stations in Siberia went offline. So now you look at a worldwide average temperature in Siberia, which is pretty cold, is no longer being recorded. Of course, it's going to make a difference. So all these factors come in and come into play when it comes to reading temperatures. So if we do break a few records one way or the other, especially if we're breaking cold records today in New England, but they kind of downplay that. They'll only mention when the temperature is high. But we just and there's a weather station in Blue Hills, Milton, Massachusetts, and it's the oldest continuously operating station in the United States. I used to live very close from it and used to go up with my children, and you can actually look into the logbooks from the very beginning, I think in the 1880s or when they opened up 1870s, and you can look at your birthday. It's kind of cool. You pull out the month, February 1959, and look at your day and see what the temperature was. And if you look at it, you would see some cold, some a little bit beyond, but nothing really, no trend. And you look at 100 plus years, you don't see any major trend like where, oh my goodness, the world's coming to an end. And these environmentalists, of course, now some of them are well intentioned. They're just deceived. They're misinformed. Others are making lots of money off it. It's a very lucrative field, being a member of the Green Lobby, environmentalist lobby. They make tons of money. And of course, if they're doing research, the government will only fund research that they want. They want to back their case, to make their case for more government. Now, Tom DeWeese was a very good friend of Dr. Michael Kaufman, and Dr. Kaufman was an expert on the agenda, on Agenda 21 and on the environment. He passed away several years ago. He was one of our instructors, and he was a trained. His specialty was the forest. He was a doctor of the forest, and he was part of the acid rain participation project, where they were looking into acid rain of the nation's lakes and ponds and streams. And what they discovered was that what's happening is that some of these lakes and ponds were reverting back to their natural state. Because the advent of technology, there were fewer forest fires, and when a forest burns, the ashes go into the lake, lowering the the level of acidity. As the forests grow back and there were fewer forest fires, so some of these ponds and lakes were reverting back to their natural acidic. It had nothing to do with CO2s. Had to do with just inventions to make things more firefighters happen less. Forest fires happen less. And when they reported this information to the U.S. government, they basically said that's not the information we want. In other words, forget about the science. This is all about politics. And that's what led him to become really, to leave that particular field and become a full-time patriot activist. And he wrote several books. Saviors of the Earth was one, which we have for sale. But he died, I believe he died in 15. No, I'm sorry. He died in 17, I think. And we got a chance to visit with him a few months before his death, prayed with him. Wonderful man. His wife was a lovely lady. And I know that Tom DeWeese and Dr. Kaufman did a lot of work together. But he also played a key role in defeating the Biodiversity Treaty back in the 90s when we used to use fax machines. Remember that? And the Senate was about to vote on the Biodiversity Treaty, which would have pretty much shut down the nation. And all the faxes, Democrat-controlled Senate too, they decided not to even take the vote. So just shout out to the memory of Dr. Michael Kaufman and all the good work he did to help prevent some of these stuff that we projected. If we don't stop this, what's going to happen? And it's interesting too. A lot of these topics that we were mentioning 15 years ago, 10 years ago, these presentations where we talked about flush tax, and these other types of taxes, mileage tax, and things of this nature. People would laugh at us, but now we see it on the headlines, and now you see even the neocon talking heads will use the term globalism and Agenda 21, which they wouldn't even mention, 15 years, 10 years ago. It's become part of the headlines here. Well, we only have a few minutes left. My apologies for my barking dog. We have this Australian Shepherd. She's a puppy, and she's a good watchdog, though. She's prevented me from being murdered by mailmen, UPS drivers, and Amazon delivery people too. So hopefully she'll settle down here in a few minutes. But I wanted to discuss, with a few minutes we have left, Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, something that we've talked about in the past, but what happens is that every year, or sometimes every 2 years, depending on the cycle of the various state legislatures, the resolutions are reintroduced for an Article 5 convention. Now, Article 5 under the U.S. Constitution is where there are two ways to amend it. And the first way is where 2/3 of the U.S. House and Senate will propose an amendment or amendments, and these amendments then will go out to be decided on the states. And you need 3/4 of the states to ratify it. It's kind of high. Let me just not 3/5, 3/4. Let me just double check here. Yeah, 3/4. That's correct. 3/4 of the several states, which means all of the states, or the Congress can also set up ratifying conventions instead of have the legislators do it. Then the ratifying conventions. They did that with when they repealed the 21st, or when the 18th Amendment was repealed, but with the 21st Amendment, they decided to use the mode of ratifying conventions. I think that may have been the first time that was used. So we've never had an Article 5 convention. So the second way of amending the Constitution is through states apply to hold an Article 5 convention, and when you need 3/4 of the states, I'm sorry, 2/3 of the states, and then you'll have your convention. And there are lots of problems with an Article 5 convention. First off, we've never had one. Second of all, there are no laws and rules that currently guide a convention, and it's up to Congress to make the rules and laws, not up to the states. So the states think that they can sort of set the agenda. Well, they can't. All the thing the state legislators do is to apply for one. Congress calls it under Article 1, Section 8 of the Necessary and Proper Clause. Congress will make the rules, and they've tried to pass laws to guide an Article 5 over the years. They have not passed anything, but that doesn't mean they won't. And then you can ask yourself, who are the delegates of this convention? We want to be able to rein in big government. Well, maybe members of Congress will be delegates. And these people who tell us, oh no, the states will have complete control, will even set the agenda. The resolutions we are calling for a balanced budget amendment or term limits all sound great. And by the way, both those amendments, which are really the most popular things, are really problems in themselves. For example, balanced budget amendment. There's a couple of escape clauses. One of them is war. The other one is national emergency. So if you have a national emergency, we can't balance the budget. Oh, but guess what? We've been in a national emergency. And by the way, the Constitution doesn't mention national emergency. And if you pass a balanced budget amendment with that nomenclature in there, you've now made national emergencies constitutional. Well, anyway, we're running out of time. To learn more about the Article 5 convention, you can visit our website. You can also, we have a lot of YouTube videos on the subject, or just call us directly, contact us directly. We can, whatever state you're in, we can put you in touch with people that are fighting it. With that, we want to thank you for listening and watching the Camp Constitution Report and Camp Constitution Radio. And until next week, may God richly bless you.